Okay. So as I said last, but absolutely not least, we conclude appropriately, or near conclude, because those who can stay will have a conclusion to the conclusion. The closing panel is called, appropriately, Kaplan and the Future of the Reconstructionist Movement. It features a really nice cross-section of enormously talented rabbis, two senior in the field, not senior people, but senior in experience, one youthfully middle-aged, early middle-aged, and one almost brand new, at least from my from my vantage point. And the three, that was meant as a compliment, the beginning of wisdom. And three of the four, in all seriousness, have an amazing, I think I'm right, have an amazing combination of a lot of synagogue experience and a lot of experience at the same time outside of the walls of synagogues, which gives for a particular interesting perspective. And it's, again, entirely fitting that our chair, Rabbi Rachel Gartner, as you learned yesterday, if you didn't already know, is indeed the Jewish chaplain of Georgetown University. So, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan and Eric, for inviting us to be a part of this day. And it's my pleasure to be here with my esteemed colleagues here and virtually here. As I think Jessica wrote in saying that, you know, if we're forward-looking, this is forward-looking in form, right? As form as well as content, we are in the future. So I, of course, am excited by the charge to consider Kaplan in the future of the Reconstructionist movement, of Judaism in America, and even in the world more generally. Not that I'm biased or anything, but for me as a practitioner of Reconstructionist Judaism, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is what it's all about. How does Kaplan's work play out in real life? So as Dan mentioned, when we're putting together this panel, we wanted rabbis working in a range of fields, congregations, campus, chaplaincy, social justice, education, and each of the rabbis you will hear from in moments themselves have worked in various contexts. So we have two rabbis who founded Reconstructionist congregations, one who's served at the college. I served at a Reconstructionist congregation for many years before I came here, and I'm on the board of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association. We have Jessica, who is a campus rabbi as well, and all of the rabbis here are very strong voices in the movement. There are also some rabbis out there, Rabbi Louis Enron, who's a chaplain, and I'm sure there are other folks that I'm missing, but we will be happy to hear you chime in throughout our time. So let me just tell you a little bit. In fact, I think I'll let you look at the bios of our panelists in the interest of time. But I'll tell you what we asked them to address. We asked our panelists three questions. First, in what ways does Kaplan most significantly inform your rabbinate? Okay, another way to think of that is, where do you find Kaplan's ideas most alive in your work on the ground every day? It's the first question, and they'll answer them in any order that you feel comfortable answering them. The second is, which of Kaplan's ideas have not proven significant or alive in your rabbinate, and whose time may indeed have come and gone if it ever actually arrived in the first place? And then lastly, which unfulfilled elements of Kaplan's agenda for the reconstruction of Jewish civilization do you think we should be focusing on and would contribute most meaningfully to the future of the Reconstructionist movement and Judaism more generally? So with that, I turn to my esteemed colleague and friend, Rabbi Dr. Jeffrey Schein.
Thank you, and hello everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor. When I was asked to join the panel and reflect on being a Reconstructionist rabbi and my relationship to Kaplan, somehow I was reminded of about 10 years ago when our oldest, my wife Deborah is here, our oldest son Ben was about to be married, and he called me up and he said, "Abba, for our wedding, I want to give you the opportunity to be my Abba and not a rabbi. And I got very flustered, and I told him, Ben, whatever you want, I just want you to have the kind of wedding you want. But I can't separate who I am from being a rabbi, and by extension, I can't separate in any way being a Jew from being a Reconstructionist Jew, from being a Reconstructionist Kaplanian Jew. They are all really woven together. So what I would like to do is to respond to the questions Rachel thoughtfully put before us. And I'm going to start with those moments in my work, and I'll particularly focus on the 20 years where I was the education director for FERCH and JRF, for the National Reconstructionist Movement, where I thought I was properly channeling Kaplan. I was aligned with his sources, and I think living out a Kaplanian dream. So I'm going to start with one around study and Jewish study. I'm going to point right back here to what looks to me like Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, symbol of the Jewish civilization program here, and share with you that between 1998 and 2002, was very involved in developing an adult learning program for the Reconstructionist movement called Eitz Chaim We. And the we was really quite intentional. We accepted Barry Holtz's lovely formulation, and back to the sources, that you want Jews to be part of the conversation, but we were radically Kaplanian, I believe, in saying that everyone should be part of that conversation. And so what Eitz Chaim We was a program across the country focused on Chamesh Megillot, sort of orphan pieces of Tanakh to begin with, where there would be adult study and commentary generated. We tried to match up congregations, so they would be sharing commentary. It turned out to be a wonderful piece of adult learning, but we didn't generate the kind of buzz around textual dialogue responding to Jews across all of North America in the Reconstructionist movement, in part because the technological platforms couldn't sustain it. But what we were after, which I think is wonderfully Kaplanian, is the sense of a Jewish text, a text and then a Jewish text, being a glue for an entire community. And Robert Scholes, a literary scholar, wrote in 1985 in the book, The Power of Textuality, what we have here is an endless web of growth and change and interaction, learning and forgetting, dialogue and dialectic. Our task as teachers is to introduce students to this web, to make it real and visible to them insofar as we can, and to encourage them to cast their own strands of thought and text into this network so that they will feel its power and understand both how to use it and how to protect itself from its abuses. For several years, Rabbi Shai Gluskin, who followed me as the education director of the Reconstructionist movement, engaged in Torah Quest, where this process was physicalized, where as people generated commentary around a piece of Torah, literally they created a web that reflected the interaction of those things. And last year I completed a wonderful year and a half as the director of a project known as the Transformative Text Project, which links 7 Reconstructionist congregations to the Rabbinical College, trying to see if we could build a full year of learning for all ages across the Reconstructionist movement, or for these 7 experimental partners that we had. So that felt really deeply Reconstructionist to me. I want to go back now in time and share with you an emperor has no clothes moment for Jewish education. My work has been largely in Jewish education. Throughout the late 1970s, flowing into the 80s and 90s, building into a kind of crescendo, there was this amazing discovery that the emperor had no clothes. For decades, people had been asking, how can we educate Jewish children? And it became clear that far from being our partners, that the parents who were there had exhausted their cultural capital. They had not enough Jewish memories in their repository of memories, not enough skill in their skills to support the work we needed to do, But being always the Kaplanian optimist, I and many other people said, well, we just have to change our notion of who the client of Jewish education is. We're working with the family, not with the individual student. Hence, a really amazing spate of creative programs, some of which continue today, and a heady sense for those people who are shaping this new field of family education of, boy, this is Davar Chadash. This is really a chidush. This is a new thing in Jewish education. And I thought so too, until in the course of teaching my students at Siegel College, a course on 4 visions of Jewish education, I paid careful attention, was forced to pay careful attention to these words from Kaplan's chapter on Jewish education. The field of the Jewish teacher's activity and influence must be enlarged, or there will soon be no Jewish teachers. If a Jewish teacher education is to prove its worth in this country, the scope of the Jewish teacher must be enlarged to include the home and the child he teaches. In fact, most of the influence he wishes to exert on the family, he must learn to exert through the medium of the parent. The teacher should be the one to establish the point of contact between the moral and religious generalizations and the specific situations and occasions in which they should be embedded. He should serve as the pastor to the family of the children whom he has to inculcate the patterns of Jewish education. One more Kaplanian debt that I want to acknowledge, and you can help me with this. This is really a paradox. So I'd like you to raise your hand if you agree with this side of the paradox. It's really important to have good Jewish schools. Please raise your hand if you believe that's the case. Okay? As good as Jewish schools can be, we can't confuse that with a total Jewish education. Raise your hand if you believe that to be the case. So, we are in the fertile ground, then, of this important paragraph from the same chapter on education and Judaism as a civilization. It is necessary to change radically the very notion of what it is to constitute the educative process, through which the objectives of an effective and attractive type of Jewish education will be attained. If Jews will rely solely upon the school to achieve these aims, they are bound to fail. In the process of education, as in other phases of social and spiritual activity, Jews cannot permit themselves the luxuries of having practice lag behind theory. In all modern theories of education, it is reiterated again and again that we respond much more readily to activities than to ideas. The mind is normally motor active rather than contemplative. Another truth which is continually emphasized, education is not a process distinct from life in general, nor is it to be confined to the 4 walls of the school. So my work in education for 4 decades or so has been very informed by this paradox. And on the one hand, I, like Kaplan in the same chapter, I have extraordinary empathy and feel a need to respond to that teacher who is trying to teach about God and feels trapped by the texts that he's teaching. Can't teach about God because God is presented in the narrative in a different way than a spiritual discussion about God would allow. So Kaplan has a strategy of differentiating, which I've tried to build on in several essays, of differentiating so that the story becomes what acculturates you into the story of the Jewish people. You can swallow that whole, and the discussions of God become important dialogues about the role of God as the anchor of your Jewish values and the source of your spirituality. I want to offer an example that has some local color that sort of bridges those 2 worlds. At Adat Shalom in Bethesda in the early 90s, Adat Shalom was part of a national covenant project that I had the great pleasure and honor of heading up, where we had 10 congregations working together around family and intergenerational learning, and each took on one of the values of spiritual peoplehood. I'll say a word more about that phrase in just a moment, but took on one of the values and developed programs. The value of Adat Shalom was Chokhmah, so they concentrated their energies around programs that embody Chokhmah. One of those was called Chaverim B'Telephone. and it embraces and links the formal affirmation of the importance of school learning, getting good at Hebrew, if only at the level of decoding, and the broader purposes of Jewish life. Here's the way it worked. People in the congregation, largely older, not exclusively, who had some Hebrew skill and were willing to give 20 minutes a week to kids, were linked up as partners. They became chaverim. And they spent those 20 minutes, directed by some guidance from the education director, to help that student come into class better prepared, more practice with the prayers, and to do better with Hebrew. But the real keter, the real crown of that process, was not the increase in Hebrew, though we cared a great deal about that, but the relationships that formed. And we saw Shabbat dinners begin to happen. We saw relationships, and it's been my pleasure these last 3 years to see in my congregation, Kol Halev in Cleveland, a rebirth of Haverim B'Telephone, now as Haverim B'Telephone or Skype or at your local Mitchell's ice cream place. And it has the same depth of building community. This notion of building out of these blocks of relationships is reminiscent of a wonderful philosopher, theorist of education, Ivan Illich, who in the early 70s wrote about deschooling society in favor of, he didn't call them chavrutas, but learning packages that could be created. The reform movement and their B'nai Mitzvah revolution is going to be trying to address the case of Sarah in a very systemic way. Sarah has had a fairly good bar mitzvah, but her real passion in life is violin. She's very clear that she won't stay in the religious school beyond B'nai Mitzvah, but we're finding a match for Sarah. We're finding a Jewish violinist who can mentor her and keep her deeply involved in Jewish life. I'm just going to say a very quick word about where the Kaplanian proposition breaks down for me. It doesn't break down. I want to differentiate between where it's extended via the question that was asked earlier. I've been here for all 4 days, so I see the continuity of these questions. Someone asked, what does the new neuroscience say about Kaplan, the way we do Jewish education? Well, Kaplan knew not that neuroscience. I don't know it deeply, but I know it well enough to have taught courses on the amazing brain and Jewish education. And I know that that what we're learning about the brain and its work, and the best book to turn to this, read Ari Brafman's Chaos Theory. Ari Brafman's the one who worked with General Dempsey to create circles of open dialogue in the Army. Can you think of a more hierarchical organization? And he did it successfully. He talks about white spaces, and if you give the brain enough time, it will organize itself and turn chaos into some amazing order. And finally, I'll skip other things, but I want to say that I think that in the work I've done on spiritual peoplehood, if you're a Camp JRF, you would say ooh-ah, because those are the values that enter that, and that was a critique of Kaplan's emphasis on peoplehood. But as I've done that, I've also given thought and would offer, in conclusion, something about a emendation, a friendly emendation. Manny Goldsmith said on Shabbat, you want to know what Kaplan's about? You can forget everything else I said. Just call it durable happiness. I don't think that captures the ethos of the Reconstructionist rabbis I work with these days. I would change that to deep and durable shleimut. I think that's a better capturing of what we're about than a utilitarian form of happiness that has its place, but is really part of an old Kaplan agenda.
Do I need to? So am I on? Yep. We turn now to my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Jessica Lott, and she's speaking to us from her home somewhere near Maryland. She is Maryland Hillel's Associate Director for Jewish Life and Learning, and I assume you're somewhere near campus right now.
I'm really thrilled to be on this panel and a little overwhelmed and humbled to be among these great thinkers and scholars who have known and had Kaplan in their lives for much longer than I. So I'll do my best. And I also want to say that I feel sort of assume that part of why Rachel extended the invitation to me is also to sort of bring forth the voices of the students that I work with on campus every day. And when I was thinking about those questions, I was thinking about the ways in which I used that which I learned at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College from Kaplan and his intellectual descendants. How do I use that every day, and how is it resonating with the students on campus who I encounter? I think that the basic idea, sort of the most basic idea, that Judaism is an evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people resonates with me in my work every day. This is language that he gifted to us, and it's absolutely a key piece for solving a puzzle about Jewish life and Jewish identity that many of my students face. They resonate really deeply with the concept of juggling lots of different identities. Perhaps most so while they're in college, in that developmental stage of differentiating as an independent adult. Living, especially in these temporary, often experimental kinds of community. Who is my community today? Who is my community this afternoon? Who am I living Judaism with in this temporary home that I've assembled of my friends, rather than the home that I lived in growing up, reflecting the choices of my parents. These students, I would argue, live in way more than two civilizations, and working with them, I'm sort of constantly aware of not only that concept, but a few other key Kaplanian concepts. One is the idea of the tradition having a vote and not a veto, that we're in relationship with the past, but not totally beholden to it. This idea that it's actually our job to be charting a course for the future, especially in a university setting. The whole academic process is about learning the wisdom of those who came before you and making some sort of meaning of it. I think, unfortunately, many college students today are being asked not to chart their own course, but to regurgitate the past rather than reconstructing it. But students are definitely in that process of learning and what Kaplan would probably call that progressive unlearning of what they came with. The trend of sort of questioning the status quo is probably not new for college students as a developmental stage, but it's new for every individual college student as they face it, and it's new for each generation of students. I find that Reconstructionist thought provides me with a language and a framework with which I can talk about these bigger questions of their lives, and with Jewish language. Sort of on a related note, I think this idea that Kaplan brought, that science doesn't have to destroy belief in the miracle, is absolutely at play for the students that I work with across the religious spectrum. And I'll talk a little bit more about that religious spectrum in a minute. The other piece that I would say is what I don't know that Kaplan ever called it this, but a concept of sort of self-reinvention. Part of what he said was, the only way to change the world is to change yourself into what you want others to be. So this is being negotiated in real time in my work every day. This question surfaces when students are faced with new ideas and new concepts, and they're faced with difference in a much deeper way than they have before in their lives. And what I find is that my work as a Jewish educator and our work as a Jewish institution, that is Hillel, is to step up to that obligation that we have to bring Judaism and Jewish expression into that conversation that students are having about the other parts of their lives. The other key concept that I find surfacing is pluralism. Also, not necessarily that he would have called it that, but that's how I grouped it. There is sort of a what I call a battle to define what is authentic Jewish expression that's being waged on campuses every day. And campuses are just a microcosm of a battle that's happening on the world Jewish stage. And even the Orthodox students that I work with are grappling with where are the boundaries, what habits and values are most meaningful. And one of Kaplan, sort of a Kaplan quote that I bring often to my work to remind me why I care about pluralism anyway, is that he said Reconstructionism seeks to put gates through fences that divide Jews into separate groups. Offering keys to those gates is extraordinarily exciting, extremely difficult, and absolutely essential. I would also say that the other piece that really resonates is that it is this idea that it's on us to build what our community is going to look like and to go through a process of articulating our values. I'll touch for a moment on the future. And part of what I'll say is one thing that I think might be still unfulfilled, but that's getting closer and closer toward fulfillment, is with regard to what Kaplan had to say about Israel. And I think about it especially today. Many of my colleagues and students are gathering at the APAC Policy Conference, and Birthright and Open Hillel and Women of the Wall, and all of these things are part of the talk of the day. And I'm absolutely reminded of how Kaplan wrote and spoke about Israel. I had a conversation just a few weeks ago I have a Jewish Agency Israel fellow working with me on campus, and she has been with us for 2 years and is returning to Israel. And one of the things that she said is that just as she's been tasked with being a shlicha, right, a messenger from Israel to our campus, she absolutely feels it's her responsibility to be a shlicha back to Israel and bring with her what she's learned from American Judaism. Kaplan knew that Zionism absolutely couldn't be limited to the state. And his idea of greater Zionism that would help Israel impact the diaspora and the diaspora positively influence Israel is alive and well in what we see, especially with regard to Jewish education and how we live progressive Judaism. The epicenters of progressive Judaism and Jewish education are in the United States, and Israelis are coming to us to learn. And that's exciting and an important obligation on our shoulders, just really living out that sort of Kaplanian Zionism. One thing that maybe I would say, another thing that in terms of the future is that on campus, we're really, and this connects back with what I was saying about pluralism before, there's interdenominational and non-denominational and all that going on. And having me as a Reconstructionist rabbi teaching Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, and just Jewish students is a huge move for Reconstructionism as a movement. And I think is hugely important because I'm able to give them, regardless of where they come from on the Jewish spectrum, a language and a framework with which to wrestle with their Jewish identities and with shaping the Jewish future. Reconstructionist rabbis are overrepresented in Hillel, and I think that's for good reason, because Hillel is also a movement thinking daily about how we navigate Jewish life in community and what the future of Judaism can and should look like. And we absolutely are having an impact there in ways that are super important. In terms of what's not necessarily working or what's also still getting worked out, I think the thing that comes up for me the most regularly is actually Kaplan's theology and God concept, whether that was in my time at RRC just a few years ago, or leading the Reconstructionist youth movement trip to Israel, in conversation with students on a day-to-day basis. It's sort of the one thing that I'm finding people not necessarily having traction or using the same vocabulary that Kaplan used to talk about God. And that's whether it's because they're sort of devoutly atheist and don't care about God and their conception of Jewish identity, or whether that's because they really do feel intimately connected to a personal God who is intervening in their daily lives. And those are things that folks who hold all sorts of other connection points with Reconstructionist Judaism and the way the values are lived out. And this is a connection point that I have found fewer and fewer folks who are falling sort of directly in line with him in that regard.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. And finally, I don't really need to get up, but take a little 7-minute stretch. My esteemed colleague, Rabbi Dr. Sid Schwarz, who is currently at CLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a little disconcerting to be as remote as I am. First of all, although you may see me in front of you, the view I have is at the back of your heads. So I wish I had some eye contact. And to add insult to injury, my view of the screen where I'm looking is obstructed by a column. But maybe it's just as well that I don't see myself talking to myself, because that would be even more disconcerting. But I'm thrilled to be part of the conference. I should say that because I don't see the faces in the room, I had the pleasure of being part of the Shabbaton, which was the kickoff for the conference at Adat Shalom, synagogue where I serve as the founding rabbi. And I guess what I wanted to say in the outset, the Shabbaton was a fabulous kickoff where many of the speakers from the conference joined us for Shabbat, and there was programming throughout the day. If there's any piece of evidence of the ongoing relevance of Kaplan's thought to American Jewry, I think those who were at Adat Shalom on Shabbat morning saw a bit of proof of the pudding. A packed synagogue on Shabbat morning, and that was only one of 3 services that were happening that morning. There were 2 other alternatives with other people going on, other things going on, different kinds of tefillah experiences, and then programming throughout the day with more than 200 people even after the Oneg. And Adat Shalom was a community, at this point, one of the largest Reconstructionist synagogues in the country, with a program that would be the envy of synagogues 2 or 3 times the size. And I think that's just one piece of what Kaplan's thinking has wrought in terms of the reality of American Jewish life. Now, I put that out there with a little bit of a paradox that I'm going to head towards, because I think that there's an ongoing tension between Kaplan's resolute commitment for most of his life not to allow Reconstructionism to become a party. A term we would use today would be a denomination. That was the creation of the RRC came after decades of opposition of Kaplan to that exact phenomenon. And I want to talk about the tension between the denominational manifestation of Jewish life and the trans-denominational programming that's going on today, and I'll get to that in a few moments. But I'm going to follow the order that Rachel set out. The first question was, what are the key ideas of Kaplan that have informed my rabbinate and my thinking? I'm going to play off of Jessica's comments and actually challenge you a little bit, Jessica, on the piece of theology, only because for me, what Kaplan did was identify the space between the 2 polarities that you gave voice to. And that is that, yes, there are people who are comfortable with a personal/supernatural God. And then there are those who reject that if they're exposed to it, and they think the only alternative to that is some kind of atheist position, whether it's secular Judaism or secular Zionism of some sort. And Kaplan essentially navigated the space between those 2 poles. Now, I would agree with you that the language he used to do that doesn't quite resonate today for most people. But for me, to have been exposed in my teen years to Kaplan's thinking, and this story I should add as a parenthetical because hopefully we'll get at least a bit of a chuckle. I was exposed to Kaplan by having a book, Judaism as a Civilization, was snuck to me by my uncle, who was a conservative rabbi. And now most boys of age 16 had their uncle sneak them a copy of Playboy, and they enjoy that. I instead got snuck a copy of Judaism as a Civilization, but took to it quite well. And in reading that, I found that there was a space between the 2 poles. I had already rejected the God that I learned about in the Orthodox yeshiva in which I was raised. And I probably would have gone quickly to that secular extreme had I not found Kaplan. Now, it's true that since the years I've read Kaplan, I found many other theological positions more compelling than Kaplan's. But I think we owe a big debt of gratitude to Kaplan for identifying this area of what he called religious humanism, a uniquely framed combination of humanistic thinking, but that has a spiritual component. The second key idea for me was the emphasis that Kaplan puts on social justice. That has been at the core of my rabbinate. My first position after I left Philadelphia was as the head of the Jewish Community Relations Council here in Washington, D.C. I came down here in 1984, where I had the chance to lead the community on a whole range of public policy issues, from Israel to Soviet Jewry, which was the cause that I had spent 25 years involved in, to domestic social justice, environmental issues, and the like. And that grew clearly out of my study of Kaplan, seeing that if Judaism / if faith does not lead us to a position that allows us to be in the world with a deep commitment to advancing greater peace and justice in the world, then it is for naught. It is simply a kind of a self-indulgent preoccupation. So that was very important. And when I left the JCRC, I established an organization called Panim, which I led for about 21 years, which explored the nexus between Jewish learning, values, and social responsibility. In the course of those years, we touched the lives of over 20,000 young people. And what I know to be true is that many of those young people came to us at a time when they would have otherwise gone AWOL from Jewish life. Because for the vast majority of young American Jews, religious school education that they get in their synagogues is so uninspiring, is such a turnoff, that within a year or two of their bar mitzvah, they essentially are saying, I'm out of here, I'm not interested. And so we had a program that essentially captivated the imagination of young Jews to say, if you want to make a difference in your community, in your country, in the world, number one, Judaism has a repository of wisdom that is as rich as any repository in the world. And you can use it to navigate the most difficult moral and ethical dilemmas that face our nation and our communities. Use it. And number two, we were able to show that the Jewish community was, in fact, among the most politically active subcommunities that America has ever seen. And they could follow those footsteps, not to mimic the policies of the previous generation, but to realize that the generations that came before them had fought to get a seat at the table, and that they could take those seats themselves. That was a powerful message, and that too came out of the strong teachings from Kaplan and from Ira Eisenstein about the importance of social justice at the center of Judaism. The third piece of Kaplan that I think is so relevant and ongoing to this day is in his talking about Jewish civilization and indicating that religion was but one piece of a larger complex of the phenomenon we call Jewish life or Jewish civilization. Kaplan, in some ways, predicted or understood what we're now reading in things like the Pew Study. And that is that so many American Jews who have a positive identification with the Jewish identity actually aren't that interested in the religious dimension of it. Now, Kaplan may not have been happy with that if he read that data today, but he understood that there was a way to be Jewish outside of the realm of religion. And he validated that in a way that no one had done before. And I think there too, it suggests some of Kaplan's prescience. Now, I want to say a word, as I indicated earlier, about this tension between the non-party, non-denominational thinking of Kaplan and the fact that Reconstructionists today has emerged as the fourth denomination in American Jewish life. When I went to RRC in the mid-1970s, there was one of our colleagues, Jeff will know who it is, I won't name him. He had his hobby was to look through all the press, wherever the Jewish press mentioned the three movements of American Jewish life, and he'd write a letter to the editor to say, don't forget, we're out there too, the Reconstructionists. I think we don't have to do that quite as much any longer. We are recognized. Now there are other groups that say, hey, what about us? Don't forget us. And much good has come out of the fact that the RRC was created, and we have a school that has been able to train several hundred rabbis and a movement that has thriving congregations, not unlike Adat Shalom. And yet, to be true, other than my work in establishing Adat Shalom, which I continue to be quite proud of and where I continue to daven, all of my work has been outside of the denominational realm. And most of the most exciting work that's happening in Jewish life today is happening on a trans-denominational or post-denominational basis. I'm right now involved in a program working with young rabbis around the country under the auspices of CLAL. The program is called the Clergy Leadership Incubator, CLE, from the Hebrew term Klei Kodesh, meaning clergy. And we're training rabbis to be transformational, visionary spiritual leaders with the ability to change the nature of the American synagogue to create the kind of compelling spiritual communities that we so desperately need. What I know to be true is that in working in these trans-denominational settings, there is a power in crossing those boundaries that exceeds anything that any one denomination could do on its own. And I'm not just talking about, I'm not pointing fingers at any movement. No movement on its own can teach and shape Judaism as powerfully as what we can do when we come together. And unfortunately, I mourn the fact that today the jealousies and the turf consciousness of the denominations continues to get in the way of the best kind of thinking and the best kind of programming that really need to lead our community forward. So I think it's just worth thinking about that. So let me say the two last things I want to observe. One about an idea of Kaplan's whose time has passed. And I want to say this because I want to, it's really one of the themes of my new book, Jewish Megatrends. And then the last thing, an idea that Kaplan had, which has great promise for the future. Kaplan was perhaps the most prominent, but was in a class of thinkers, rabbis, philosophers that articulated the ethos of 20th century Judaism. I would date it from 1880, the beginning of the big emigration of Jews from Eastern Europe, to 1980. For those 100 years, the ethos of American Jewry, of Judaism, American Judaism, that Kaplan so well articulated, was to put out a model of Judaism that would allow Jews to fully enjoy the fruits of America and all that it offered without jettisoning one's Jewish identity. It was kind of an accommodationist, integrationist modality. And Kaplan was joined by people like Horace Kalin, who's the architect of cultural pluralism, or Milton Convids, who taught at Cornell, who wrote a shelf full of books about how the Bible and Judaism were consistent with each other in terms of ideals. But I want to argue that that ethos is an ethos whose time has passed. Today, American Jews don't need to have lectures or books written or movements created to tell them that they belong in America. We've done that quite nicely, thank you. Whether it was because of Kaplan or not, I'm not sure we can attribute it to him, but Reconstructionist philosophy clearly created a framework that allowed that to happen. Today, I think we need to articulate an ideology of Judaism that declares Judaism to be radically countercultural, not in the notion of the 1960s, although if you want to have some drugs and rock and roll, it ain't so bad, but rather in the notion that what America offers us today is not sufficient. It is culturally vacuous. It is spiritually bankrupt. And in that setting, Americans are looking for places of meaning and purpose. Judaism should be, first and foremost, a place where Jews can find that. And that is not to make the case that we are the same as America. It's for us to say that without leaving America, we can offer an alternative to the cultural wasteland that is American cultural life today. And that is an ethos quite different than Kaplan could have ever anticipated. And I don't blame him for it. I think in that way Kaplan was a product of his time, even though he was ahead of his time. But I think the tide has turned on that philosophy that Kaplan and people like Kalin and Convids also articulated. The last thing I'll say is an idea which I think we haven't sufficiently explored of Kaplan's. You know, Kaplan's radical idea about theology and his rejection of chosenness is so important. And other people have built on Kaplan's work without attributing, by the way. I think notably of Jonathan Sachs's book, The Dignity of Difference, that makes very much the same point that Kaplan was making 75 years before Sachs wrote his book. Not to say Sachs' book is not important, but the importance of the idea, I think, cannot be sufficiently underscored. And that is that we need to create a world where religion, where faith communities are not put at odds with each other because each of us are basing ourselves on a triumphalist vision that our truth is the only truth out there. And what we see is that where religion has become essentially poisonous to societies, not just in America, but throughout the world, is where that triumphalism that Kaplan rejected is once again ascendant. But even more than that, not only is the case that Kaplan has argued that we can love and be passionate about our faith without saying we're the best or we're the only truth out there. But I think the other piece that we haven't even explored sufficiently is to understand, I believe that in 50 years, people will be amazed that we have not thought about our faith in greater concert with other faith communities as well. We are one piece of the wisdom of the world. Now, I will give a lot of credit here to the work that Nancy Fuse-Kramer is doing at RRC, doing some amazing work in interfaith learning, but we're only scratching the surface of it. I think if we understood the implications of Kaplan's teachings, we would understand, and by the way, it's appropriate that this conference is happening at Georgetown, which has a magnificent tradition of interfaith work and understanding where each faith is informing the other. And I think this is something that Kaplan is really pointing the finger, pointing the direction for, that we need to explore all the more in the years to come. Thank you.
Sid. Thanks for the shout out. We're going to just take a couple minutes of rabbis going back and forth with each other, and then we'll open it up to the questions. And I know Rabbi Schein wanted to.
The history of America is my history. I was educated in the public schools of my community. The history of America is my history. But Hebrew is my tongue too, and Jewish history is my background also. Lincoln and Jefferson are my heroes, together with Moses, Akiva, and Maimonides. They all get along in my imagination most companionably. At no point am I conscious of strain between the two worlds. I move from one to the other with such naturalness that I am scarcely aware of the change in spiritual locale. That's from Milton Steinberg's Partisan Guide to the Jewish Problem. And I both agree and disagree with Sid, mostly agree, that we're well beyond the place where living in two civilizations is a helpful rubric in the sense that what I like to call this easy eclecticism or this integrationist strategy needs something else. I'm working with Eric on trying to appropriate some of the thinking from Michael Rosenak, the Gaon of Israeli Jewish education, who's much bigger than education because of his appreciation of paradox and creative tensions. And I think that we need a meta-understanding of our relationship to the civilization that doesn't cancel it out, but learns how to thrive on the differences. I do think, Sid, my only disagreement is I think there are wonderful things still about American culture, and I'm not ready to consider it a wasteland. I think there are pockets of wasteland in it, and Judaism can help be a corrective or critique, but it's not a wasteland.
You know, just to chime in from the millennials kind of generation perspective, whereas Kaplan was, as Sid, you were pointing out, was talking about how do we as Jews feel ourselves as belonging here? I don't know where to look at you. Mm-hmm. I find with students that their question is, do I belong in Judaism? And they're confident in their American identities and skeptical, if not either uneasy or not confident in their Jewish identity, all the way to skeptical that there's anywhere where they belong. So for me, however, sometimes I feel that Kaplan, as Jessica mentioned, is a gateway. And I'm wondering if Sid, someone said, I think it was Jeff who said that, or maybe Sid, you said Kaplan opened up the space for you theologically to then explore things that you explored, maybe, I don't know if you would say past, but other than Kaplan theologically. And I find that Kaplan is the entrance both into feeling accepted theologically. I don't know if I believe in this kind of God. I don't, where do I fit in? Also in terms of peoplehood and acknowledging right, the broader understanding of what Judaism expects of us, invites of us, validates in us. My question is, do we get stuck there? And how do we move with our students? Peoplehood. Someone spoke in the last panel about reducing the idolatrous reduction of Judaism to peoplehood, and I wonder about that a lot in terms of the way where we're putting our programming, where we're putting our energy, and I'm sort of wondering what you've found maybe has worked to take us to the next place, and what isn't working to take us to the next place. Is that a question? There's a question.
Right. So let me just a few words to Jeff and Rachel for that observation. I describe in my analysis in Jewish megatrends, I talk about the fact that next-gen Jews, specifically Generation X, Y millennials, are almost dramatically post-tribal. They really push away tribal labels. And we have to recognize that our community, the Jewish community, is a tribal community made by tribal Jews for tribal Jews. And I don't use the word tribal in any pejorative way. I'm a total tribal Jew. And what I mean by it is that I identify strongly with the history of the Jewish people. I cast my lot with the current Jewish community in its broadest conception, including the state of Israel. And I see my fate tied up very closely with the future destiny of the Jewish people. It is harder and harder to have next-gen Jews instinctively feel that. And that's why I call them post-tribal. And all the affiliation patterns and all the data we have, not only from Pew, but the studies that came before it, give us evidence for that. So and that does challenge a philosophy of Kaplan, which is so strong on peoplehood, because peoplehood is simply another term for tribalism, quite frankly. Can it be done? I think it can be done, okay? But I think increasingly we need to use covenantal language to attract next-gen Jews, by which I mean, if we can talk about the way in which identifying with a people/tribe called the Jewish people can advance values like chesed, compassion, tzedek, justice, shalom, peace, a view of a world in which we don't see one faith being true and others being false, or that we have some kind of mutually exclusive model that only one faith can prevail. Those are values that actually are quite resonant with the next-gen Jews that you, Rachel, and you, Jessica, work with every day. And I'm happy for you to affirm or deny that, but that's how I read it, because I've also spent time with that generation of Jews. But I think we need a new playbook, and this is where I'm so excited to see what Jeff's working on, because Jeff is the kind of the dean of Jewish educators in our community for Reconstructionists anyway. So how we start to convey some of these tribal peoplehood ideas of Kaplan in a way that resonates in the covenantal language that next-gen Jews won't push away is, I think, the challenge for the next generation.
Yeah, I think that even though we may be post-tribal, I still find that the students, they don't want to be reduced to one identity, but they want to belong. And they want to belong to something that is unique and different and special. Right. But they don't want to be reduced or exclusive in that belonging. Tribal plus.
Yes, everyone is unique, just like everyone else.
right.
Jessica, that's profound.
No, but absolutely, I wanna echo 100% what Rachel just said, that they're actually sort of waging that internal battle is what I frequently talk with students about, between I don't necessarily fit in a box, but I want to be in a contained space with a bunch of other people who have something in common with me. So I don't want to be in a box, but it would be really nice if there were a box around me. And that's sort of this great paradox that's being waged in each individual and in the community at large. I find that there are elements of Reconstructionism that really give us a method for dealing with that question, and that's really helpful. But that is definitely the question on the table.
Now, I would one more final piece, and then I'll turn it over to Dan, that I've been sort of wondering as we've been speaking and throughout the conference. Someone mentioned Chabad earlier on and how they're doing it right. And both National Hillel and others of us have taken on very much this one-on-one approach, right? This let's meet you where you are and have conversations and try to move them more deeper. And you know, I've been thinking, is it that students fall in love with ideas, Jessica, in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, it's people they want to fall in love with, right? It's relationships they want to have. And I wonder how that maps onto Kaplanian theology, whether or not it's finding traction. You know, I'm thinking about that. But Dan, do you want to ask us some, or ask
Can I just add
questions?
real
Yeah,
quickly
I will stop.
that there's some things that Kaplan would smile deeply at, and I think of what's happening in Cleveland, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and many other communities out of a Covenant Foundation grant where Jewish artists are gathering, getting the support of being with one another, studying deeply Jewish texts, and then using those texts to create their art. So you are meeting them where they are as artists, but leading them through their Jewish connection to some other creative expression. I think Kaplan would smile big at that.
Great. So we still have time for a few additional questions. I have several good ones up here, so keep them coming up by cards or text or email as we begin to talk. I want to start by sticking for a moment with this, I think, hugely important issue of tribalism or non-tribalism. I have heard, I wish Deborah Waxman, unfortunately, had to go back to Philadelphia because of the weather, but she is now the leader in every sense of our movement, has talked recently explicitly about non-tribal peoplehood. In Evanston, Illinois, there is an extremely radical version of non-tribal peoplehood being proposed that I don't fully understand. Kaplan, of course, taught us, I think was, as Sid said, of course, a tribal Jew. I think I am a tribal Jew, but without the chauvinism, the profound chauvinism of chosenness, which remains the single most radical thing, I think, in a way that Kaplan did. It remains the single most controversial thing. He got rid of the fundamental chauvinism of chosenness, of election. You know, within a tribal peoplehood context. Yeah. And of course, he taught us we can and should live fully in two civilizations, not just one. So what does non-tribal peoplehood mean in any strong sense beyond what Kaplan has already given us? I can't get an answer to this. Anybody want to try?
So, am I muted again? Okay, good. Actually, you know, Jonathan Sachs wrote a really interesting piece. he's doing a lot of interesting speaking nowadays about the three different kinds of community that that folks assemble in, especially Jews. And he talks about the difference between Edah, Tzibor, and Kehillah. And I actually think that those might be, which all mean community in different ways. And that those might be ways in which we might give us new language for talking about peoplehood. And Edah, which is a word that you know, camp uses pretty frequently, right? In the Jewish camping world, so it's an enclosed unit of people who intentionally are together and sort of have a group thing. That's sort of, I think, where maybe denominations might fall. Tzibor is sort of a gathered public, people who happen to be in the same place at the same time and are part of the same project, but it's sort of fleeting. And a kehillah is people who might be strategically assembled to engage in a particular project. And part of what I found that really interesting, he advocates actually that Edah is the best form of community in the piece that he wrote about this. And what I actually find is that knowing that we have those three different kinds of ways to assemble folks and using them strategically, depending on what kind of assembly we would like to have, might actually be one of the ways that we deal with what it means to be a people. That sometimes we're an Edah, and sometimes we need to be a Tzibor, and sometimes we need to be a Kehillah, and that we negotiate those depending on what our goal is and who the people, and therefore that's how people gather.
That's great. I'm having a vision of now a computer-generated sign outside the congregation Sid founded, where a dot can morph into Tzibor and Kehillah.
Depending what you want to see. Right?
Looking at interesting that our congregations, right? Not many are called Edah, like Adat Shalom is. Many are called Kehillah or a bait, right? They're called bait something. They're called a home, but we don't have a lot that refer to themselves as a tzibur, as sort of a random haphazard gathering of folks. And we actually don't have a lot that refer to themselves as an Edah.
Right.
I just want to jump in from this place, and Sid, you referenced Nancy Fuchs-Kramer in terms of taking us down an interfaith path for just a moment. One of these interesting challenges of precisely what Kaplan did by keeping tribalism but taking away triumphalism. It's very interesting as a Reconstructionist rabbi to think about what it means to do genuine interfaith dialogue when, for some communities, our chosenness is what they wish to be a part of, right? So as a Reconstructionist who is burning chosen
denomination, yes.
It's interesting when you don't consider yourself elect anymore, how you have interfaith conversations that are really genuine. So that's been something I've been playing around with here on campus.
Switching gears, we have two related questions about Israel, the state. And what first is posed explicitly for Rabbi Lott. Rabbi Gartner obviously can jump in. She has the same campus experience here. And one is just a very straightforward question, which is, do you find students are interested in J Street? Somebody mentioned APAC. Is there much involvement on your campuses with J Street?
We have a larger interest in J Street than APAC, but we definitely have both. There are students there right now, and there's a strong J Street voice as well.
Absolutely. Same thing at Maryland. We have a really strong J Street U chapter, and we also have a really strong Terps for Israel APAC chapter, as well as a lot of students who are not interested in engaging in the political conversation at all. And that actually is the majority of our students are interested in connecting in terms of Jewish identity and culture, and are not as interested in the political conversation on my campus.
And the broader follow-up question is, in what way, if any, do you see Kaplan's ideas being valuable, specifically valuable, in helping your students deal with the difficult issues surrounding Israel today?
Want to go first?
Well,
Or Jeff, you want to say
no,
something?
you guys should go first.
Yeah.
I'll layer on it. You live it. I have a different perspective.
Chelsea, you got anything? Because I don't have anything right now.
So I'll say, when I was actually trying to prepare for this panel, I realized that Israel was one of those things that, I pulled out that piece about that he really thought that Zionism, it was as a movement to redeem the Jewish people and regenerate its spirit through the reclamation of Eretz Yisrael, right? And, but part of what he said is that it has to foster a sense of interdependence between Jews and Israel in the diaspora, and that it has to give, it said, he wrote, I have a little quote here, and this made me just want to reread all of his writing about Israel and Zionism. It has to give the individual Jew the feeling that participating in that interdependence and interaction makes him more of a person. And if that isn't hugely helpful to the conversation, I don't know what is, because what I was just articulating, that students say, I'm willing to go on a birthright trip, or I'm willing to sort of engage or be connected in some way, but not in a deep way that's real interdependence and interaction. Kaplan sort of calls them to task on that in a way that I, as an educator, could find really helpful, to say, no, you actually have to participate in an interdependent interaction, and that's what makes you more of a person and a Jew, is being part of that back and forth conversation between Israel and diaspora.
Jeff?
So I don't deal with the college age demographic, but I do deal with teens one stage back, and work with a master, guy named Amnon Ophir, of what he calls soft advocacy. And I've watched him spin an amazing web, and been part of that in some ways, of having teens form a connection to Israel and to jettison the political dimensions. You can do that better before they're in college than when they're in college, and give them the richest set of experience with Israeli artists, with Israeli writers, and then work with them. This is the always present lilmod ululamed dynamic that we don't do enough of in Jewish life. After you've immersed them in that work, then you work with them to become the people who convene informal, easy conversations in their schools with their non-Jewish friends, with Jewish friends who are distant, about what Israel means to them in a non-political discourse. And it's magic at that age if you can do it well.
It's hard to do non-political discourse at Georgetown.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it just is.
I want to just say then that when you back up and when is it over? Because you haven't started early enough. I would not be faithful to my lifelong partnership and intellectual partnership with my wife, Deborah Schein, where we work on starting with very young children and families and do the 100 languages of children meet the 70 faces of Torah. If we wait till they're teens, yet alone college, and even to the age where they enter synagogues, we're sunk. That same biological revolution of neurobiology tells us that our minds get wired in amazing ways, but the most significant wiring is when they are very, very young, and we ought to be paying a lot of attention to that.
Yeah, Dan, can
A couple more.
I jump in here, Dan, for a minute?
Sure, just beware. We have a couple more areas to cover very fast, but go ahead.
Yes, I just want to loop back to a point that Rachel made a few moments ago about this issue that if we want to pursue the interfaith path, we need to be wary of or mindful of the fact that those who are interested in working with us actually do see us as the chosen people. So it reminds me of a powerful anecdote I want to share that happened when I brought a service mission of members of Adat Shalom down to Haiti. We were deeply involved with the project supporting a school in Haiti. I'd met the pastor who founded the school at a church in Léogâne in the center of the earthquake in 2010. We raised a significant amount of money now to help the school, and we're now organizing our third service mission. When we went on our first mission, I had a group of about 18 people, half adults and half young people, ages 17 to 30. And each night, during the day, we were building houses, and at night I was doing Jewish text study to frame the whole experience. The young people had less interest in the Jewish framing. You know, their sense was, we're down here to build houses. What's the Jewish thing have to do with it? It was a classic post-tribal, push away, don't tell us this has to be a Jewish thing. We're doing this because we care. And then we went to church at Pastor Johnny's church on Sunday morning, when the entire experience was about them greeting us as Bible-believing Christians. They saw us as though we had walked out of the pages of the Bible. We were the chosen people who had brought them support, sustenance, belief, hope, the future. And suddenly, without my saying a word, all of our group, including the young people, understood what it meant to be part of a story that begins with Abraham and continues through an arc that teaches Me'abdullah Cherut, that we are the archetypal people that have experienced the trajectory of going from slavery to freedom, from oppression to redemption. And this is an arc that every people in the world today identifies with. Suddenly, the mantle of chosenness was taken gladly and with a full heart, because they understood it in the covenantal way that I was talking about before. And I tell that story because it suggests a way that we can really capture the passion and the hearts and the minds of next generation Jews, because we do sit on something very precious. We just have to repackage it a bit.
Okay, two more quick but very important questions. This one, there's a lot behind it, and I'm just going to state the simple question. But under what circumstances, if any, do you feel that the current leadership of the Reconstructionist movement would be able and willing to embrace a radically new liturgy? Anybody? I think what's behind this, just to, I'll gloss it very briefly, is the notion that Kol Neshama, beautiful though it is really in many senses a very traditional Siddur, basic core Hebrew liturgy that more and more Jews in the pews complain they simply can't relate to. I think that's maybe what's behind this. And is there something, it's true, a radical innovation in liturgy possible today in the Reconstructionist movement? And is it desirable?
Yes, it is important. I feel in some ways we're still catching up to Kol Neshama. I mean, there's so much that needs to happen for people to get the most out of that I would be patient. But I also love the services we do around Marcia Falk and her predicate theology, and I think there's space for services that are a different mix of the Tefillat Shebalev, prayer that comes from the heart. We heard that from Kaplan several times about those stories. And the traditional matbea shel tefillah, the set liturgy.
As the middle-aged rabbi in the group, I was reminded
Young
of
middle-aged,
young
young
middle-aged. What does that mean? I mean, I think we're doing it.
I thought you were talking about me when you said young middle age.
Yeah.
No, that's me, Sid.
I mean,
These are our kids.
I
No.
think we're doing it. We're embracing it. Even if not officially and technically through the commission of a new prayer book. In terms of living with liturgy, there's all kinds of experimenting going on. So I think there's an openness there for sure.
Great. Last question. It's a big one too. Which we'll touch on it anyway. So the focus here, this afternoon in this panel, the questioner posits, has been on Reconstructionism as methodology much more than on movement. So he'd like to hear some comments on Kaplan vis-a-vis the institutional movement. And I'll add somebody else's part to this, although it may make it too big. Do you think that with or without that influence, the movement, if it's assuming it stays a separate fourth denomination, will grow, shrink, or stay about the same size over the next 10 or 20 years?
How could we reference a dozen different times Kaplan's optimism? And if we think we're B'nai Kaplan, of course it will. And I actually believe that, that the message of Reconstructionism, both in its institutional form and in other forms, will continue to be vibrant and heard and appreciated.
Other thoughts, Sid? Joseph?
Well, I'm very ambivalent about this one. The fact of the matter is, denominations of American Jewish life are not going to go away. I'm getting feedback loop here now, so I can't hear myself think.
You're clear here.
Yeah.
There's a law of organizational dynamics which almost guarantees that even after an organization loses all purpose, there'll be a way to keep it going.
That's comforting.
And I'm not putting that at the feet of our movement. I'm just saying that organizations don't generally go out of business. Some people may know that 3 years ago, the American Jewish Congress closed up shop, and then 2 weeks ago there was an announcement that Hillary Clinton was going to be the keynote speaker at the annual meeting of the American Jewish Congress that no longer exists. So it just proves that that's on my team. Even dead organizations come back to life. You can't quite kill them. It's like Freddy in the movies, right? Coming back.
Now.
That brings us back to the liturgy conversation.
I think that the walls of the movements, given that they're not going to go away, and I do a lot of work with seminaries across the spectrum, from Orthodox to Jewish renewal, I think there's got to be much more collaboration between seminaries, both within the Jewish world and between the Jewish world and the non-Jewish world, Christian and Muslim in particular. Very, very important. And I think the more we can make those walls permeable, the more relevant our institutions will be. The more our movements remain insular, the less relevant they'll be. I run the retreats with rabbinical students from 11 different seminaries, and they walk away saying they've gotten so much learning from the approach, the hashkafa, the worldview of students who they would otherwise never meet. But frankly, structurally, the seminaries are not set up to create that kind of interaction. And so I think we'll hold on to the forms, but we need to do that very lightly.
And I would say, it'd be a major chaval if we didn't have any of those forms left as someone who's gone through the system, that, comparing myself to students who have left other seminaries at the same time, we stand in a place, comfortably in a place from which to move forward, that at least my colleagues of my time weren't as comfortable in that place, so there wasn't that ability to be an incubator of these ideas and to cross-fertilize within our community. So I think we would lose a lot if that space for real innovation was not continued to be carried and held by our movement.
Great. So I'm going to close with Rachel's permission just by reading a lovely comment I just received by email from Rabbi Fred Daub, Sid's successor at our Shabbaton host congregation at Dot Shalom. Rachel just said the question is whether the coming generation has a home in Judaism. My 5-year-old at Dot Shalomer son was listening over our shoulder, heard it, and exclaimed, "Yes, I do. Yesh tikva, there is hope." I think that's a nice way to end. Thank you all.
Oh, okay.
This is the formal close, but not the close. Let me explain. I'm going to say a few words of thanks. Very importantly, we're going to free our wonderful electronic and sound team. Thank you all so much. I'll begin there. You've done an amazing job. I think I'm right in saying they went to the extreme of staying over in hotel rooms last night to be sure they could be with us, and that's hugely appreciated. So they're going to shut down. We're going to say goodbye to Fred and everybody and his kids and everybody else watching out there. We had at a peak, I think, a total of over 500 people, I'm told, online, believe it or not. That's not the entire conference, but overall, which is amazing. And beyond that, I think we'll be seen by a lot more people who will download archived portions of this. Will also, to the extent people have formal papers they wish to share, and some do, those will all be online separately as well. So in no particular order, one housekeeping note. If you haven't already, please pick up a copy of the Jewish Forward, assuming it's out there. One important thank you is to the Jewish Forward, the primary media sponsor of this conference, and we're grateful to them for all they did in that regard. Probably, I think, most importantly, to Georgetown University, to Professor Jacques Berliner-Blau, Melissa Spence, Audrey Anderson, and our amazing team of students who have come and gone. I'm not sure if any are left. You were, I say this, truly from the heart, absolutely, ideal hosts in every respect. And I've already told Jacques we'll be back in 10 years, if not before. Seriously, someone's got to celebrate the next big milestone, what is it, 90th? I'm losing track of time. I can't add anymore. 90th anniversary. We are celebrating, of course, as is implicit in all of this, the 80th anniversary of the publication of Judaism as a Civilization, and a little belatedly, Kaplan's 30th yahrzeit. So thanks also to McGill University and its Jewish Studies program, department, I should say, well represented here, at least by Eric and Dr. Alan Nadler, and I think that's it, right, from McGill, for all of their work. From my heart to my partners in the Kaplan Center, to Mel Skull, to Eric Kaplan, to Jack Wolofsky, thank you for all you have done and will be doing as we move forward. Thanks also and sincerely to all of you here. I mean, you made this conference what it is, and I'm not going to lose sight of that as well. I'm not done yet, then you can talk. And then to those of you online, as well. So, Eric, who am I? Leaving out yourself. No, I'm not leaving out. He's going to do that.
We're all very tired, but I'm not that tired enough to say how indebted we all are to Dan Cederbaum. His energy and his vision are a miracle, and they overwhelm with the creation of this conference, of the Kaplan Center, and of all the website and everything that may come in the future. And I, for one, who have labored in my study for so many years, I'm glad that we're finally out in the world. And I am enormously grateful to Dan and everything that he's done.
Thank you. Rachel wants to... Rachel's going to give us the closing bracha, which is lovely. The shuttles are running. Anybody who has to go can leave at any time. They'll be out at the gate running between now and 6:15 or so. For those who would like to stay, we're now offline. We are going to reconstitute you as an informal advisory board for the Kaplan Center and have, I hope, an intimate conversation about where we're going from here. I know some people are interested in that conversation. Feel free to leave as we get reorganized here if you must or wish to. And then we're also going to allow the Georgetown folks to pack up while we're talking. Rachel?
The endeavor of figuring out a way forward as a community is an art, not a science. Oh, what a fulfilling endeavor it is. As Kaplan wrote, the artist is the human being as creator par excellence. Out of a block of stone with a chisel, out of some grains of colored earth or brush, out of a few disparate sounds, she can fashion an environment of culture and spiritual illumination. It is in what we create that our personality finds complete fulfillment. Any art, however, which is without relation to the life of the group is meaningless. Art reaches its heights when it is expressed in an expression of social life. In looking at the future through the lens of Kaplan, we stand as students and makers of art, gazing at a canvas, brush poised, hopes high, that in bringing all we have inherited and all that we have yet to dream up, we can paint a future, a Jewish future, that is beautiful, lasting, and redemptive. And so, as always, we are banim, children, and bonim, builders. May all that we have learned and taught one another here these past 2 days bring us, the Jewish people, and our world to a better place. Amen.